Welcome to the Explainer. Let's jump right into this. Today we're taking a super dark, absolutely fascinating psychological dive into the afterlife, specifically an ethereal limbo inhabited by sentient, monstrous entities. But we aren't just looking at the monsters themselves, we're analyzing something deeply human about them. We're going to examine the mental gymnastics, the complex motivations, and the totally baffling ways these creatures attempt to rationalize their absolute worst actions. I want you to imagine a psychological courtroom where the guilty are constructing their own elaborate, reality-bending defenses.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our agenda for today. First, we'll look at the psychology of limbo, then escapism and altered memories, blaming an inherent cosmic horror, the violent crowd's defense, shifting the ultimate blame, and finally, echoes of our own excuses.
Section 1. The Psychology of Limbo.
To really grasp these bizarre rationalizations, we've first got to understand the interrogation room itself. According to one of the entities known as the amphibious monster, this limbo isn't just some physical place with rock and water. It's an ethereal counterpart. It operates almost entirely on psychological symbolism. And this right here is the absolute key to our whole analysis. The very architecture of this realm is theorized to be built from the oceanic material of memories. So these entities are literally swimming in their own pasts. They aren't just serving out a sentence. They're actively trapped in a space completely shaped by their own recollections, desperately weaving justifications just to make those memories bearable.
Section 2. Escapism and altered memories.
So, our first psychological defense mechanism is honestly one of the most extreme, just complete escapism from reality. The amphibious monster describes life on land, with all its annoying gravity and physical rules, as an infernal panopticon, basically, a prison where you're always being watched. The monster looks at the basic physical and moral rules of the normal world and says, nope, too restrictive. So to justify completely abandoning those rules, the creature claims that leaving the land allows for limitless growth, like literally becoming the size of islands or surviving in extreme, crushing, suffocating environments.
Now, what's really wild is just how far the amphibious monster takes this evasion of accountability. Hiding out in the deep water just isn't enough. The monster constructs this incredibly elaborate, totally bizarre theory that the condensed matter and extreme pressure of the deep ocean somehow generates energy for localized time travel. Yeah, you heard that right. It claims that by using its own memories as kind of like bookmarks, it can jump back to specific points in time to entirely rewrite its history. Think about the mental gymnastics here. Rather than just facing the guilt of its actions, the monster invents convoluted pseudoscience to convince itself it can just bend the arrow of time and undo the past. It's total, absolute denial through imaginary time travel.
Section 3. Blaming an inherent cosmic horror.
All right, let's move to a totally different psychological bucket, justifying cruelty by claiming the universe is just fundamentally broken anyway. Here we have two distinct entities, the overgrown statue and the blue mage. Both of them use the universe's inherent horror as a get-out-of-jail-free card for their behavior, but they go about it in very different ways. The statue leans into this passive fatalism, basically saying everything is doomed anyway, while the blue mage uses active cruelty, claiming he's just the executioner of the universe's dark will. Let's look at the statue first. The overgrown statue speaks in these really dense, poetic, honestly kind of maddening rhymes. It claims the universe is inherently horrible, sordid, and just totally deplorable by default. And because reality is nothing but a contradictory sea, where meaning is completely shattered, the statue argues that destruction is actually sunny. Like, it's a good thing. To the statue, optimism is just adorable and naive. This is a textbook abdication of moral responsibility. If the universe is already a nightmare, the statue argues, well, you can't blame it for acting like a monster. It's literally just matching the aesthetic of a doomed reality.
Then you have the blue mage, who takes this cosmic blame game to a whole new level. This entity actively delights in cursing people to complete isolation and futility. So how does a guy like that sleep at night? Well, he argues that it isn't personal cruelty at all. It's just physics. He claims to use electromagnetic forces to enforce destiny. By telling his victim that they're nothing but a solitary atom in a sea of deterministic molecules, the mage totally removes his own agency. He's basically saying, hey, you can't blame me for psychological torture if I'm just executing the inescapable deterministic laws of existence.
Section 4. The violent crowd's defense.
Now this brings us to a really chilling, totally recognizable real-world concept, mob mentality. And it's brilliantly illustrated by the terrifyingly casual defense of an entity known as Zombie 1. This creature was part of a mob that absolutely relished mass destruction. But when asked to rationalize it, They just claimed they were supporting their leaders. They justified gunning down innocent people by abstracting them, literally calling them just neurons regurgitating thoughts they happen to dislike. But their ultimate defense? Because we could, and did, and why not? It is such a clinical, terrifying look at how groupthink completely erodes individual morality.
And this quote right here perfectly highlights the ultimate cognitive dissonance of Zombie 1. They openly admit to enabling violence and happily voting for a deranged leader who destroyed lives. Yet they feel completely 100% immune to infernal punishment. And why is that? Simply because they died naturally. They genuinely believe that because they weren't forcefully blasted into the afterlife like their victims, they somehow outsmarted cosmic justice. They equate a peaceful death with a clear conscience, completely ignoring the massive bloodshed they enabled while they were alive.
Section 5. Shifting the ultimate blame. Moving on to our final and arguably most complex defense mechanism, absolute deflection. Cerberus is a literal three-headed monster, and very appropriately, its defense is to literally argue with itself. First off, it completely rebrands its horrific actions. It won't admit to burning hundreds of people. Instead, it calls itself a resolute protector of warmth. I mean, wow. Then it immediately turns on its own other heads, blaming them for mixing insanity with inabilities. It is the ultimate failure to take personal responsibility, just played out live among conjoined personalities. The real kicker here is that Cerberus completely ignores the curdled screams it caused and focuses entirely on how unfair its punishment is. It literally points to other fame-seekers and victors in history who committed mass atrocities but seemingly escaped justice or died quickly without facing this long, psychological rotting. Cerberus's defense isn't, "I am innocent." Its defense is, "Why am I the only one in trouble?" It is literally using the existence of other unpunished evil to justify its own. It's classic whataboutism.
Section 6. Echoes of our own excuses.
So let's pull all this together into our conclusion because, guys, this isn't just a breakdown of some fictional monsters. When we strip away all the wild supernatural elements, the time-traveling oceans, the overgrown ruins, the three-headed dogs, what are we actually left with? We're looking at the architecture of a human excuse. We see these exact same cognitive dissonances in everyday life. When we mess up, do we try to rewrite the narrative to escape it, like the amphibious monster? Do we blame the system or destiny for our bad behavior, like the mage? Do we excuse our apathy by saying, well, everyone else was doing it, like the zombie? Or do we just point fingers at someone who did worse, like Cerberus?
These entities are trapped in an ethereal limbo made of their own memories, forced to constantly vocalize the twisted logic that keeps them from facing their guilt. But honestly, we construct our own mental limbos all the time. The rationalizations we feed ourselves to avoid feeling guilty, those become the very walls of our own psychological prisons. So, I want to leave you with this to chew on. If our memories construct our limbo, what excuses are we building today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this deep dive into the echoes of Limbo sparked your curiosity just as much as it did mine. Catch you next time.